On this podcast, we explore fantastical thinking, moral panics, urban legends, conspiracy theories, hoaxes, and crazes, examine the forces that shape our culture, and tell the stories that create the realities we share, and sometimes the realities we don't. I'm your host, Chelsea Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria.
If Jesus was still walking the earth, he'd be a Klansman.
The truckloads of kiddies on their way to the Ku Klux Klan kiddies camp at Lake Worth.
Satisfied our laughing feet and blind at the black flag.
The exalted Cyclops will then give 3 raps with his gavel and take his seat.
When the landmark silent drama, The Birth of a Nation, premiered in 1915, it claimed to be a factual account of the post-Civil War years, presenting the original Ku Klux Klan as gallant, fearless patriots fighting for a teary-eyed, victimized Old South. Adapted from Thomas Nixon's 1905 novel, The Klansman, the star-studded movie was rife with revisionist history, showing cartoonishly villainous white actors in blackface running violently wild, attempting to assault white women, trying to exert political power over white men, all supported by sinister northern carpetbaggers and Union thugs. That is, until the cross-burning, hooded heroes gallop in as valiant knights dedicated to the protection of white womanhood and a return to the pastoral fantasy of white supremacy. The Birth of a Nation was indeed a great feat of filmmaking at the time, a 3-hour-long production with revolutionary techniques, using multiple camera angles, new forms of editing, better lighting, close-up shots of actors' faces, and an emotional score played live by a 40-piece orchestra. It was the foremost feature film of this magnitude, and it has been called the Star Wars of its time, the first true Hollywood blockbuster. Fearing that the central messages of this movie would reignite even stronger racial resentment, the NAACP organized protests across the country, but only a handful of theaters would refuse to play The Birth of a Nation. And in fact, it was so widely beloved that it would become the very first film ever screened at the White House. According to the papers, the movie received passionate standing ovations at every showing. Women wept, young men cried out to the characters, kids screamed in terror at the monsters, and at least one man shot his gun at the screen. Immediately after the movie's colossal premiere, a red-headed, downtrodden preacher in his mid-30s began placing newspaper ads for his fraternal order beside listings for The Birth of a Nation. A few months later, on Thanksgiving night, he led his new gaggle of men to the top of Georgia's Stone Mountain, where he built an altar, laying out an American flag, a Protestant Bible, and an ornate sword, then raising up a clumsy wooden cross and lighting it on fire. The preacher gathered the men around the blaze and recited mumbled incantations, and then flamboyantly declared himself
William Simmons, the Imperial Wizard of the Invisible Empire of the Knights of the New Ku Klux Klan.
Just a few days later, at the Atlanta premiere of The Birth of a Nation, frenzied audiences walked out into the dusk and were struck by an uncanny sight, as if the movie they had just seen, something that had already felt so real, was coming to life before their eyes. There, in the middle of the street, were more than a dozen horses covered in white sheets, their riders wearing white robes and pointed hoods, each cradling a rifle to his cheek and sloppily firing rounds into the dimming night sky. The crowd went absolutely wild, almost like children seeing employees dressed in massive plush costumes of their favorite animated characters at an amusement park. And in a way, this was true. The now cliché white-robed uniform and burning cross were not historically accurate hallmarks of the original Klan. They were, instead, fictional devices of this white supremacy superhero movie, which meant that the members of the Second Rise were essentially cosplaying at their very own KKK Con. We often think of the Ku Klux Klan as a rogue group of vicious vigilantes, as anonymous, murderous, extremist terrorists hiding under their pointed hoods. And while this is accurate in many ways, for several years in the 1920s, the Klan was, as Linda Gordon put it in her book, The Second Coming of the KKK, quote, the biggest social movement of the 20th century, a true mass pop cultural American craze. For this two-part series, we'll meet the combination of sincere bigots, amoral opportunists, and hypocritical hucksters who revived the Klan in the 1920s through a kind of national, well-organized proto-pyramid scheme that made the leaders rich through marketing that presented the group as a patriotic, upstanding, and fun organization for native-born white Protestant Americans, along with sales pitches that included a new roster of sensationalized scapegoats. While we'll take seriously their appalling impact, we will also be demystifying this legion of embarrassing losers, reminiscent of many we are dealing with today, to show that this kind of fascist-adjacent ideology is often rife with laughable, ceremonial, dweeby delusions of grandeur. We'll see how, through PR pomp and circumstance, millions, yes, millions of citizens were convinced to join up with the Klan, a group that still committed violent acts of terrorism and political manipulation, all while riding the Ferris wheel in full hooded regalia beside what they called 100% American families.
Let's all stand for an old-fashioned revival. Almighty God who created the heavens and earth, I ask now that every demon power in this building will be broke, the power of Jesus Christ be made manifest. Lord, weak, but we're not defeated. Satan, I adjure thee in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, come out of the people.
During his time as a fire and brimstone Calvinist preacher, before he marched his new Klan up to the peak of Stone Mountain, William Joseph Simmons claimed he was given a sudden vision by God that revealed to him a very special divine mission. It was a warm summer night, and he was gazing out of his living room window when, in front of a giant map of the United States that superimposed itself on the night sky, he saw a group of men in white robes galloping on horseback among the stars. He had often reminisced fondly about sitting on his Confederate daddy's knee as he told of his glory days in the first Ku Klux Klan, and Simmons believed he was witnessing the spirit of God's favorite pale soldiers of the glorious Old South. Overcome by the beauty of what he had just seen, Simmons dropped to his knees and began to pray. or at least that was the story he liked to tell. Not long after this revelation, he was injured in a car accident and became bedridden for several months. This period would prove to be very consequential to American history, for it was in that resting bed that he cooked up a 54-page pamphlet, a rehashing of the original Klan prescript with a new twist. His own series of secret codes, secret passwords, initiation rituals, costumes, as well as new titles and ranks for members. Simmons had long been involved in different fraternal orders, part of a secret society craze that peaked in the early 1900s, when it was estimated that 1 in 3 American men were enrolled in at least one, and he styled his new Klan in a similar manner to the Freemasons, the Oddfellows, or the Shriners. By all accounts, a talented public speaker, Simmons was known for his love of alliteration, and he applied that to the stupid fucking language he created for the new Ku Klux Klan, replacing the first letter of words with a KL or inventing new KL words altogether. Each chapter would meet at their own clavern. Secret meetings would take place in the Klonclave. When they chatted, it was a Klonversation. When they all wanted to get together, they would have a Klonvocation. When they sang their songs, they called them Clodes. Lecturers were known as Clocards, the vice president, the Clayliff, the person leading prayers in meetings, the Clud. What the group of Kluxers did would be called Klancraft, and they would do so with clannishness. He called this little tome, for some inexplicable reason, the Chloron. I guess it sounded better than the Klybel. Now, I imagine you'll agree that it's one thing to enjoy a fantasy role-playing game with friends, but it's quite another to believe that you are living in one. Here's an excerpt describing part of the initiation ritual.
Just prior to the opening of the Klonclave, the Clayliff will procure the mounted flag and stand it at and in front of his station. The Clocard will procure the altar flag and the unsheathed sword and place same on his station with flag folded compactly. The Clud will procure the vessel containing the dedication fluid and the Bible and put same on his station. And the Nighthawk will procure the fiery cross and stand it at and in front of the station of the exalted Cyclops. The Cluxter and the Chlorogo will close their respective doors, the Chlorogo making his secure. After this is done, no one will be allowed to pass the Chlorogo into the cavern until the conclave is duly opened. The exalted Cyclops will then give 3 raps with his gavel and take his seat.
When reading the rest of this dorky diatribe, it becomes clear that Simmons wanted to produce a less aggressive Klan than that of his father. In fact, white supremacy is only mentioned twice. Much of the rest of what is written reads like a run-of-the-mill fraternal order flowery devotional about honor, duty, patriotism, brotherhood, and service. The subtext screaming silently about what it was that the violently bigoted wizard really wanted to say, shrouded in the language of a fantasy role-playing game that to him was deadly serious. But there was already a precedent for this type of bullshit. The first wave of Simmons' daddy's Klan came, of course, in the wake of the Civil War and the Union victory that promised a new freedom to enslaved people. The KKK rose as a loosely organized secret society operating in southern states during Reconstruction, a violent, terroristic force attempting to suppress any and all new power that was within the grasp of the newly free. But these dumb fuckers were always as goofy as they were violent. They came up with titles like the Grand Wizard, the Grand Dragon, the Grand Giant, the Great Titan, the Nighthawk, the Hydra, and the Grand Cyclops, with the rank and file members referred to as ghouls. The early version of the group had a vaudevillian slant. They would parade around in all kinds of costumes, beyond the common black, red, or white robes, wearing raccoon skin hats, horns, fake beards, polka-dotted paper hats, or pointed caps that made them look like wizards or dunces. They were kind of like a band of sickening troubadours, playing instruments and performing skits in the streets, and many people who saw them commented that they thought that they had come from the circus. Often they dressed up in white sheets to appear as the ghosts of Confederates, trying their best to scare free Black people for their own amusement, presenting themselves to the grateful white South as a society of masculine, merry pranksters. All the while, though, they lynched and whipped and tortured and terrorized thousands of Black people, as well as their white sympathizers, and their intimidation reached even those who would never see one of the estimated 500,000 Klansmen. Once their goals had been reached, the electoral disenfranchisement and the subjugation of free Black people through sharecropping, essentially a new form of slavery, the KKK largely faded away, content that they had helped revive the Old South in the name of white supremacy. When Simmons brought back the Klan in 1915, he was responding to a political and cultural moment as much as he was responding to his new favorite movie and his alleged spiritual vision. 3 months before he climbed Stone Mountain, a Jewish factory superintendent named Leo Frank was falsely accused and then convicted of the murder of a 13-year-old white female employee, and a group of vigilantes calling themselves the Knights of Mary Fagin abducted him from prison and lynched him to much celebration. This act of violence, as well as the narrative that a brutish Jewish man had killed a young Protestant girl, added profoundly to the U.S. rise in anti-Semitism and helped fuel a desire for a new type of movement against all the nation's domestic undesirables. The rate of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe had also been increasing, and thus the Catholic and Jewish populations were growing, as was the fear that this would cause Catholicism, Judaism, communism, and socialism to take root in the happily capitalist, Protestant, nationalist United States. The Great Migration saw scores of Black Americans moving north into majority white cities, competing along with new immigrants and working-class whites for increasingly scarce jobs. Race riots were soon scarring cities in all corners of the country, leading to mass casualties of Black people, with some white deaths as well, deaths that helped reinforce the birth of a nation narrative about marauding bands of Black men coming for innocent white people. Along with the women's suffrage movement, the changes in sexual mores of the Jazz era, and the conviction that alcohol was fueling all the ills of society, the world felt completely different for Protestant white Americans, many of whom felt they were losing control of the nation they considered to be their rightful city upon a hill. Add in the fact that inflation was high, unemployment was rising, and a recession was brewing. As always, the dominant culture was looking for someone to blame. Though the new imperial wizard had found some success as a traveling preacher, he was very bad with money, evidenced by the fact that he was fired multiple times by different churches for running them into debt. In 1920, the 5-year mark of the new KKK, he had only gained around 3,000 members and was so desperate to make his group look bigger than it was that he put on a PR stunt parade of hooded Klansmen, only for them to be revealed as Black men he had paid to put on the act. Simmons knew he needed help if he was going to spread his movement beyond the shadowy corners of his handful of claverns. In the early 1900s, a man named Edward Young Clark Jr. had been working as a journalist at the Atlanta Constitution, a newspaper owned by his rich father, but had grown tired of being paid a measly writer's salary. So in 1909, he started various get-rich-quick schemes, which often involved swindling his fellow man in a variety of creative ways. A journalist writing of Edward Clark in 1923 said that he, quote, learned how easily people can be induced to part with their money in what is represented as a good cause. Eventually, though, he found a real job working for the National Chamber of Commerce to rehab dying towns through his brand of pomp and circumstance. He was called to Atlanta in 1915, the same year that The Birth of a Nation was breaking cinema records, to help a county that had been reeling from a 1914 drought. It just so happened that this year, the harvest yielded a huge agricultural haul, and Atlanta wanted to celebrate in a big way to show they were back in business, and Edward Clark was given the massive project of creating a 6-day fair, the largest the city had ever seen. When the big day arrived, a patriotic flurry of red, white, and blue flags streamed across the city. All day long, free outdoor band concerts and vaudeville performances entertained crowds. There were literal dog and pony shows and a performing baby elephant. There was the down-home crowning of the Harvest Festival Queen and the subsequent Queen's Ball. There were hot air balloons, a tightrope walker who balanced on a line downtown between two 14-story buildings, a cloud swing, the precursor to the modern trapeze act, a section called Carnival City with rides and games, as well as several processions, including a women's suffrage march, something called a Monster Civic Parade, and another with 10,000 members of local fraternal orders. And of course, no festival would be complete without a parade of 300 toddlers pushing decorated prams with their dolls inside. There was a replica fort built at the center of the Piedmont Park racetrack, blown up by a bomb dropped by a military captain's plane. Later, the Fighting the Flames show saw a 3-story hotel constructed for the festival lit on fire and burned to the ground, while
hair-breadth escapes of dancers were made from the roof.
Perhaps the most exciting event was the record-breaking Better Babies contest, the largest that the South had ever seen.
Big babies, little babies, fat babies, thin babies, curly heads and Goldilocks. They all turn up full of hope. Better put a smile on, baby. The judges are coming, and it's now or never.
These shows were incredibly popular at the time, bolstered by the mass movement known as eugenics that promised to create more perfect American bodies and minds through selective breeding. Parents of children from the ages of 6 months to 4 years could sign up to have their offspring judged in a similar manner to the livestock a few booths over, gaining points for size and shape, behavior, physical health, and mental hygiene. The parents of the child with the best measurements and temperament, sometimes awarded the honor of perfect baby, would win a cash prize, a trophy, and a newspaper feature. Though these contests were created to promote health at a time when infant mortality was a big issue, they were also, as you might expect, open only to white babies from non-immigrant families, and helped reinforce what the dominant culture believed was an acceptable and exceptional American body and mind. This massive Better Babies contest was organized by a woman named Mary Elizabeth Tyler, nicknamed Bessie, who had been involved in their increasing popularity across the country. Along with that pram parade that was also conducted by Bessie while wearing her trademark black pumps and cape, the contest caught the admiration of Edward Clark. Bessie, too, had been impressed by the magnitude and success of Edward's organized festival, and when they finally met, the business fireworks flew. They saw in each other a lucrative partnership in a brand new professional field known as public relations. So they rented a nearby office and called their new venture the Southern Publicity Organization. Now, you might be wondering why I'm telling you about these two entrepreneurial randos. Well, it's because they were about to become the official PR team responsible for promoting the Ku Klux Klan's second rise, turning an old national menace into one of the hottest new trends. More after this. And now, back to the show. Within a handful of years, the Southern Publicity Organization picked up big-name clients by focusing on fundraising as well as membership drives for the Atlanta Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and the YMCA. But the biggest get for the agency was the prohibition superpower called the Anti-Saloon League that had been using various forms of propaganda and pressure campaigns to sway local, state, and federal governments to pass into law a total ban of the creation and sale of alcohol. In an early PR stunt, Edward Clark, inspired by the propaganda employed by the Allied powers of World War I, rented a plane and flew over the city, Bessie taking fistfuls of leaflets featuring the anti-alcohol messages of the Anti-Saloon League and dropping them out of the hatch, watching them flutter down to the busy city streets below. 9 months after the Anti-Saloon League achieved their ultimate victory in the ratification of the 18th Amendment, which banned the production and sale of all alcoholic beverages, and just 2 days after Congress passed the Volstead Act, which would define how prohibition worked in the United States, Edward's then-wife arrived with a cop in the middle of the night to catch her husband and Bessie Tyler in the act, entwined in their bedsheets and drinking from a bottle of the very whiskey they were hired to demonize. The pair were carted off to jail in their night clothes, charged with the possession of alcohol and disorderly conduct. The arrest was a big problem for their business, as they were unable to keep it out of the press despite giving fake names and getting an employee to take the fall for the booze. With this new embarrassment, and with their best client, the Anti-Saloon League, no longer needing their services, things were not looking good for the Southern Publicity Organization. It was the employee who had taken the fall, J.Q. Jett, who would come to Edward and Bessie with an idea he believed could save the floundering company. He had become a massive fanboy of Imperial Wizard Simmons and the new KKK, and believed that the Klan could become a powerful new client. But as you might imagine, Edward and Bessie were nervous about the potential controversy such a partnership could cause. However, they weren't morally opposed to the group, and at JQ's suggestion, Edward was initiated into a local clavern and immediately saw great potential in this chiller version of the Klan, who had essentially been branded cinematic superheroes by the most popular movie in the country. The Southern Publicity Organization believed that the risk would be worth the reward. So they drew up a contract for the Imperial Wizard Simmons that presented an unorthodox sales plan they claimed would skyrocket his modest fraternal club into a massive, lucrative national organization. New Klan memberships, available exclusively to native-born white Protestant men, would cost a flat fee of $10. That's around $170 today. Of that money, the Southern Publicity Organization would receive a whopping 80% of what they directly collected, with that money being used to further promote the KKK, allegedly. The rest of the national structure looked very similar to a pyramid scheme, to multi-level marketing, more accurately described in this case as single-level marketing. Bessie and Edward broke the country up into 9 domains based on region and assigned a grand goblin to oversee each. And then, within those domains, were smaller slices of the area called realms. The salesmen of the KKK, called Kleagles, would work on commission only, doing the grassroots work of recruiting and initiating new members, receiving $4 for every $10 fee, with the other $6 sent to their regional manager, the King Kleagle. He would get $1 of that money, and the remaining $5 was sent to his boss, the Grand Goblin, who took 50 cents. The final $4.50 would be sent to the Southern Publicity Organization, who would deposit $2 into the KKK General Fund and pocket the remaining $2.50. Keep in mind that $2.50 was worth more than $40 in today's money. The single-level marketing scheme meant that everyone in the hierarchy had an incentive to pull in as many new memberships as possible and to spread the territories as widely as possible. And all of these profits, which included additional monthly and annual dues that were also divvied up, would be untaxed because they registered the KKK as a tax-exempt fraternal organization, making sure that each of the $10 fees were recorded as a donation, known as a KLUX token. The contract also stipulated that Edward Clark would be appointed the Imperial Kleagle, the national head of all recruitment efforts. The Klan would work sort of like a franchise, with different states having different variations of practices decided by the leader of each clavern. For example, Atlanta offered different degrees like Masonic groups did, new levels you could reach by hitting different goals. Level 1 was K-Uno, Level 2, K-Duo, then K-Trio, and finally K-Quad. And can you believe it? Each level came with a fee, as well as higher annual dues. But that's not all. Of course, the KKK would be nothing without their merch, and merch was yet another way that Bessie and Edward saw to make a profit themselves. The robe and hood combo cost $6.50, or about $110 today, but cost just $2 or $33 to produce. New members were expressly forbidden from making their own uniform and were required to buy them only from the official Klan factory, a business called the Gate City Manufacturing Company. It just so happened that Gate City had been incorporated just 2 days after Simmons and the Southern Publicity Organization made the agreement official, the new deal signed by factory owners C.B. and Lottie Davis, which were, can you guess, secret pseudonyms for Edward and Bessie, who pocketed the profits from the robes themselves. In addition, Kleagles in the field were told to pressure recruits to buy more and more KKK merch, the commission of which was sent up the sales ladder as well. We are talking Bibles, helmets, cigar cutters, belt buckles, painted chalkware figurines, swords, paperweights, rings, medals, brooches, necklaces, posters, banners, pocket knives, phonograph records, sheet music, and little candies with the group insignia printed on the wrapper. They also sold Klan life insurance policies to its members through a company the KKK also owned and operated. Within just a year, there were 1,100 Kleagles recruiting in realms all over the country. And within just 3 months, the number of Klan members across the nation grew from 3,000 to 48,000, bringing in the equivalent of $8 million today. Bessie and Edward knew that the original KKK's focus on subjugating Black men and women could continue to work in the South, but if they were going to make the most money possible by recruiting the maximum number of eligible Klansmen, they had to update their bigotry and moral concerns to appeal to their different sales regions. The Klan Manual of Leadership put it this way:
The first and most essential duty of every leader is to know completely the situation in which he is to act and what is wrong with the community. The situation will be different in each.
Basically, they needed to harness the disgruntled emotions of each area by flaring up local hot-button issues and building up new bespoke boogeymen. In the North, the anger over Catholic and Jewish immigrants became the biggest selling point. On the West Coast, those pitching the Klan would often focus on the resentment around Chinese and Japanese immigrants. Oh, and they threw Mormons in too. In California, Mexican workers became a common grievance. The Klan even presented themselves as a solution to the new labor union problem in areas afraid of socialism, communism, and anarchism, as well as an extrajudicial solution to the scourge of alcohol, which they also claimed was the fault of various scapegoats. They pitched themselves as crusaders for a 100% American morality, slayers of sin in all forms, the single force that could stop the scourge of drinking, gambling, premarital sex, and loose women, sometimes taking it upon themselves to raid dance halls, burlesque theaters, and movie houses. All these ills blamed on immigrants, Catholics, Jews, Black people, communists, and any other faction they were pitching to a specific location. All over the country, the specter of the immigrant could be used, the ones who were taking jobs from real Americans, and they advocated for an end to what they called non-Nordic immigration, accepting only those particular hyper-whites from a Protestant tradition. They also supported a mass deportation effort of the immigrants they considered unacceptable, no matter how long they had lived on U.S. soil. They called their movement 100% Americanism, an order dedicated to the protection of sacred white supremacy under a Protestant God, a protection of their women, their children, and their patriotic future. As part of their sales plan, the KKK also used familiar conspiracy theories and created fake evidence to whip up the fear and hatred that was their bread and butter. There were the Jews in Hollywood who were attempting to hypnotize and corrupt the Christian nation through the content of their movies. They also spun tales of a concerted effort by the Pope to take over the country, commanding a sea of Catholic immigrants to
plunder, pillage, rape, and murder
100% American families. This narrative was propped up by a forged document said to be written by the Catholic Order of the Knights of Columbus, which directed their army, quite dramatically,
wage relentless war, secretly and openly, against all heretics, Protestants, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics. Rip open the stomachs and wombs of their women and crash their infants' heads against the walls in order to annihilate their execrable race.
In addition to tales that told of black plots to kill white people en masse, the KKK also claimed that
a class of cultured Negroes have organized societies to promote mixing of blood. The members of these societies are oath-bound to marry none but white women.
Of course, they also used the language of masculinity, presenting their group as a show of true manhood, while putting down all their enemies as feminine and weak, yet simultaneously telling the public that these chosen scapegoats were strong, dangerous threats to 100% Americans. As another part of their project, they systematically used conservative Protestant preachers, usually fundamentalists, evangelicals, charismatics, or Pentecostals, as mouthpieces and quasi-recruiters, offering them free memberships and special benefits, with some 40,000 ministers eventually inducted into the Klan. KKK-affiliated churches often rejected the image of an all-loving, gentle Jesus, instead presenting one who was aggressive, hypermasculine, and vengeful, claiming that
If Jesus was still walking the earth, he'd be a Klansman.
as a recruitment tactic, conspiring preachers would pick an opportune moment for the fully costumed Klansman to burst through the church doors on a Sunday morning, the organist striking up Onward Christian Soldier as they marched down the aisle to gasps, presenting a donation for all the congregation to see and admire.
Look at this.
The group would then lead the church in singing hymns and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, sometimes topped off by their own KKK sermon. As they continued to bring in the kind of cash that Simmons could have only dreamed of, the Southern Publicity Organization continued to up his salary in order to keep him from questioning their financial arrangement. Edward convinced him to move into a large house in a nice neighborhood in Atlanta, using Klan funds that would legitimize him as a savvy businessman of good class standing, furthering the image of the Klan as upstanding and normal. This was all done through a brand new company called Clark Realty, and Edward Clark would position himself as the owner of Simmons' home as well as the massive Klan headquarters in Atlanta and many other major Klan buildings across the nation. He would not only make a commission for each sale, but would also collect a large interest on the money he loaned out for purchases, and would use the KKK General Fund to pay rent on the buildings his company owned to himself. Paying for things from the General Fund meant that the Southern Publicity Organization was using very little of the money they were taking in from commissions, although the agreement had stipulated that their large cut was fair because they would be putting much of it back into marketing the Klan. But without Simmons knowing what the fuck was going on, there was absolutely no oversight. Bessie Tyler, also looking for other revenue streams, bought a printing press and created a new Klan newsletter called The Searchlight, crowned with the motto,
Free speech, free press, white supremacy.
In addition to the typical racial, religious, and cultural propaganda, the printings also shared recruitment tactics and success stories from the field. The Kleagles were instructed to pressure recruits to buy a subscription, and these papers were also sold at newsstands all over the South and Midwest, and even featured advertisements purchased by companies as mainstream as Studebaker and Coca-Cola. Not only was Bessie collecting money from the Searchlight, but the Southern Publicity Organization could use the press to print all the materials needed for the KKK, and then pay themselves back from the Klan General Fund yet again. Eventually, the group would have their own affiliated radio stations, pamphlets, books, sermons, and even more newspapers. In order to combat the Jewish Hollywood conspiracy, the Klan would also create its own production studio, the Cavalier Moving Picture Company, but it put out just 2 movies, The Toll of Justice and The Traitor Within. All this meant that their members had an entire media ecosystem to deliver them curated news and information, and thus didn't need to look at any sources outside the KKK. In fact, Edward and Bessie even worked with a production company called Fox Studios. Yes, that one, to promote positive, cheerful narratives about the Ku Klux Klan using silent reels of news stories that were played in movie theaters. Reels known as, I am not kidding, Fox News Weekly. But of course, behind this tamer version of the KKK were countless examples of members' vigilante campaigns of violence and intimidation. Early on, hundreds of robed Klansmen marched on Election Day as a warning to Black voters, sometimes attacking them, often physically blocking them from or burning down the polls completely. When a mob of Klansmen in Florida chased a group of Black men from the white side of town where they were casting their votes, a fight broke out that ended with a massive fire that burned down 2 churches, a lodge hall, a school, and 24 homes in the majority Black neighborhood, leading to several deaths. There were ongoing assaults against anyone the Klan considered an enemy, ones that often included beatings and whippings, sometimes culminating in the KKK's new favorite bit of brutality, tar and featherings. There were more than 200 lynchings during the years of the 1920s when the Klan was most active, largely targeting Black Americans, and there were instances where Klansmen would torture people by pretending they were going to be lynched and then stopping right before they died. They burned crosses as shows of intimidation outside Catholic churches, schools, and homes, sometimes planting bombs or burning the buildings down. They set fire to farms owned by Japanese immigrants. They murdered Mexican farm workers and ran others out of their towns. And these are just a handful of examples of what they were capable of. But instead of owning their terror, as they might have in the 1800s, the KKK continued to deny these acts of violence, claiming that they were false flags created by their enemies to make them look bad. Simmons went as far as to say that the Klan was not, in fact, anti-Black or anti-Catholic. That, too, was a ridiculous smear. They were simply fighting for 100% Americans who had lost their precious voice. But whether people believed that narrative or they simply supported the Klan regardless of their actions, membership numbers continued to soar into the hundreds of thousands, each man getting to step into his own fantastical, esoteric cosplay, feeling the power of holding swords and swearing oaths and whispering passwords, accepted into a secret society that made him feel something like a masculine, medieval super crusader. But the Southern Publicity Organization knew that there were potentially millions more average 100% Americans that could be swayed to join if the Klan continued to present their warm and fuzzy side. The KKK needed to take off the hoods to fully come out of the closet, or rather, the clavern, and they would do that by returning to Bessie and Edward's roots, event planning. More after this. And now, back to the show. As a big part of their continuing PR blitz, Klan leaders all over the country began organizing public amusements for their local communities. Free mass gatherings known as Convocations were put on during the summer around the 4th of July at fairgrounds or large public parks. They would be advertised all over, in newspapers and flyers, on announcements taped to trees, and by preachers who hyped the events to their congregations. The Convocations were explicitly created to be as fun and family-friendly as possible, mimicking fairs and carnivals without some of their more unsavory aspects. There would be rides like Ferris wheels and games to win prizes. There were food stands, musical performances, races, contests, beauty pageants, and better baby competitions. There were hot air balloon rides, daredevils jumping off 100-foot buildings into nets, and trick aviators flying with red crosses illuminated on the bottoms of their planes, sometimes flying low over the Kluxer, introducing the event clad in his garments and astride a horse, a cross burning behind him. The last performance of the night was a big parade that included massive American flags, marching bands, motorcycle brigades, performers like stiltwalkers, intricate floats, and of course, burning crosses for which cities would sometimes cut the streetlights to make the fire burn brighter and feel more cinematic, their version of a climactic fireworks show. Sympathetic companies could sell their products at these events and offer special Klan-only discounts. Thousands, and sometimes tens of thousands, of locals and those who traveled from nearby towns would attend, shown a version of the Klan that was generous and fun, helping to create those warm, happy, summertime feelings in what amounted to millions of potential recruits and their families all over the nation. At the same time, parts of these events were also opportunities to create fear and anger, with Protestant preachers, KKK speakers, and local Klan fan politicians spewing propagandic rhetoric about the specific dangers that faced their community. To exploit all these feelings at once, both the good and the bad, they would perform mass inductions into the Klan, adding hundreds and even thousands of new recruits in one pop. But that was far from the only way the Klan normalized themselves. They actually had their own official baseball teams that played for the public, including more than a dozen semi-pro teams in different cities across the country. Sometimes they went up against other klaverns, but they also challenged fraternal teams from the very groups they targeted, like the Jewish B'nai B'rith and the Catholic Knights of Columbus. According to the papers, when they went up against the all-black team, the Wichita Monrovians, they lost 10-8. There were KKK-sponsored weddings, christenings, funerals, dances, and concerts. There were KKK social clubs, drama clubs, fishing clubs, gun clubs, choir clubs, and Bible study groups, giving opportunities to those looking for entertainment and community. There were musical groups that wrote and performed songs in the popular style, with titles like The Kluxer Blues, Yes, Uncle Sam, We're Coming, That's Why I'm a Klansman, and the obvious hit, We'll Put Bibles Back in Public Schools. Let's take a listen to one of their funny novelty songs, The Stuttering Klansman.
Let me tell you how I love Old Glory. It's the greatest flag I know, and I'd like to be a Klansman, for my love I want to always show. Let me give to you a promise. I will pledge allegiance now to you, and I'll don my white robe underneath Old Glory. I love her true.
And here's my personal favorite. Daddy swiped our last clean sheet and joined the Ku Klux Klan.
Klux Klan has come to our town, and it's come to stay. Hear the kids talk round, this is what they say.
Satisfied our last clean sheet and joined the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh, he's all for that secret justice,
Thinks he's quite a man.
when mother has some company,
She's in great distress, for now that our last sheet is gone, why things are in a mess. Daddy took the pillowcase to cover up his head, but he soon found out that it would smother him in sweat. He used to care for fishing like any other man,
but now he's wiped our last clean sheet.
and joined the Ku Klux Klan.
But who was out there doing the kind of domestic labor of these events and clubs across the country? A new all-female group that would work in tandem with the main fraternal order, conceived of by none other than Bessie Tyler, who claimed it would be on equal standing with the men's group, despite protests of the masculinity-obsessed KKK. This came about first during a congressional hearing related to the problems that the Klan was causing, which we will cover in Part 2, yet another way for Bessie and the gang to give the Klan a softer feel. As it turns out, white Protestant women were certainly interested, because within just a month of the official creation of the WKKK, 250,000 of them joined up across the country. Perhaps playing off of the women's shopping craze of the 1920s, the WKKK offered a similar robe to their male counterparts, but also offered a far more expensive version that came in satin, costing around $460 in today's money. The Women's Ku Klux Klan wanted to present itself as something akin to a simple club for American housewives. Klan publications often included sections for women that featured advice for homemakers. For example, the Kook's Kitchen Cabinet, all spelled with K's, provided new recipes and cooking advice. Another section, Style Tips, taught readers how to get that feminine, 100% American look. Avoid furs, do not overdo rouge on the cheeks, never put on makeup in a public place, and make sure all personal beauty is conservatively displayed. Charitable works were also promoted as a large part of the women's group. They put on fundraisers for schools and orphanages and families in need, as long as they were white and Protestant. They donated to families of police killed on duty, to certain sympathetic universities, and to the descendants of Confederate veterans. Much of this, however, was another PR strategy. Less than 1% of the money made from most WKKK klaverns actually went to charitable causes, and most of that money actually went to buying Protestant Bibles for public schools. Many of the projects the group claimed to be working on never fully materialized beyond the initial positive publicity they generated. All the while, the financial structure of the group, similar to that of the KKK itself, was serving to make leaders at the top almost as rich as their male counterparts.
Why is it, my friends, if I had my way, do you know what I'd do? I'd take every barrel of liquor, every bottle of booze, every crate, and I'd empty it in the river, yes.
The KKK's fervent support of the Prohibition movement, the laws of which had proven difficult to enforce, certainly led many women to enter the ranks. The men's group raided saloons and dance halls in tandem with their police buddies, or they did it all themselves, narking to the cops about what they found, leading to the arrests of local bootleggers and speakeasy owners. The Prohibition movement had been intimately entwined with the women's suffrage movement, a way to combat the brutality women and their children faced from their drunk husbands and men on the street. This meant that some hardline prohibitionists who would have been considered feminists were recruited into the Klan. This kind of proto-white feminism meant the WKKK groups could sometimes support women's entrance into the workforce, including women taking positions in politics, church leadership, and police forces. It meant that many of their ranks spoke out in favor of property rights for women and against the harm caused by immoral and violent men, even encouraging divorce for those in abusive marriages. Some even supported the failed Equal Rights Amendment of 1923. But the quiet championing of new rights for women extended only to those who were 100% Americans, and ultimately they were more aligned with the mission of the male KKK and white supremacy than they were with their gender beyond their privileged status. The WKKK also became in charge of several auxiliary groups focused on raising the next generation of Klanspeople. They would make appearances at Protestant churches to try to convince parents to enroll their kids into whichever one fit their age and gender. There was the Junior KKK for teenage boys, which included their own rituals and regalia. Sometimes, when the JKKK would make itself known in communities, they would burn a J next to the cross. There was the Tri-K Club for teen girls, where they would be instructed on how to be a good wife and mother and how to protect their sexual chastity, as well as why they must stay away from dangerous races and ethnicities in order to preserve the future of Protestant white supremacy. These girls would be a big part of KKK parades and would be able to compete in beauty and popularity contests, winning the honor of Miss 100% American. The Junior KKK and the Tri-K were presented in a similar way to the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, offering sports for the boys and arts and crafts for the girls. Both could join marching bands and become flag bearers for their marches. Girls were especially encouraged to become singers, with one festival advertising the Tri-K as
cute girls, catchy songs, and cunning costumes.
Spelled with K's, of course. The Ku Klux Kiddies were a group of young children and babies who were born to Klan members. They put on mass baptisms for dozens of children at once, in which they dedicated them both to God and to, quote, the principles and ideals of Americanism. They were also featured in KKK parades, in one example, marching in mini robes and hoods alongside a float featuring a red schoolhouse, a nod to the 100% Americanism they were promoting in public schools. Klan members and their families could also visit various summer camps, including the Texas-based Cool Coast Camp, to swim, fish, and learn about nature. The first page of the original brochure reads,
Cool Coast Camp, the healthiest road to the coolest summer.
It was promoted as
a real family recreation under high-class moral conditions.
Targeting the kids who would obviously be interested in this summer fun. The brochure reads,
Put a bug in Daddy's ear and hold him tight. He will let you come.
And to show just how normalized the youth Klan became, I found this article detailing a trip to Fort Worth taken by silent movie actress Mary Anderson, known as Sunshine Mary. On her fifth stop of the day, the paper described her visit to yet another KKK youth camp.
In the afternoon, Sunshine Mary went to the Ku Klux Klan, where the Cyclops, Julian Heyer, introduced her to the truckloads of kiddies on their way to the Ku Klux Klan Kiddies Camp at Lake Worth. Surrounded by robed Klansmen, bright little Mary flung her arms around as many of the children as she could and told them stories of how they could become great by working hard, honestly, and living good, clean, pure lives.
Throughout this ongoing nationalist dog and pony show, Bessie Tyler, Edward Clark, William Simmons, and other Klan leaders were raking in the equivalent of millions of dollars from their incredibly successful marketing scheme, as well as the many other side ventures that were also siphoning money off of white Protestant America's racial and cultural grievances. For part 2 of our series, we'll continue the story by looking at the newspaper exposés and government investigations that sought to crack the KKK, the group's national political strategy to essentially take over the government, the shocking crimes that would shatter the upstanding image of their leadership, the way those who were scapegoated by the Klan fought back, and the many things the 1920s era KKK has in common with a certain movement we find ourselves surrounded by today. We'll continue to ask how a hate group as infamous as the Ku Klux Klan became so widely accepted that the clannish Kluxers from the Klaverns and the Klonclaves no longer felt the need to hide their loser clucking faces.
Remember well, mighty clansmen of the nation, the hopes and faith that our country puts in you. We're far from safe from like swords of invasion, against our flag, boys, the old red, white, and blue. One language only, one school in which to learn it, one country to be loyal to. Is our creed as clansmen, and please God.
This was American Hysteria. Make sure you come back next week for part 2 of Ku Klux Scam. If you want to support our show and help make sure that we can continue to create it, as well as get ad-free episodes and bonus content, you can go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll get access to, among other things, Hysteria Home Companion, the other podcast that I make with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we cover and stories that we just know that you'll love. We have a huge back catalog, so if you sign up, you will have hours and hours and hours worth of episodes right away. That's patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. If you go to AmericanHysteria.com, you can pick up some of our merch. 100% of those profits go to the Samir Project, a Palestinian-led mutual aid group in Gaza. You can also leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline about a tale that you remember from growing up or one you've heard recently, and we might do an entire investigation about it. Another great way to help out our show is to leave us a 5-star review on whatever app you use. You can also follow us on Instagram at American Hysteria Podcast. Thank you to Matt Miller for providing some audio for this episode. American Hysteria is written, produced, and hosted by me, Chelsea Weber-Smith. Our producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer and sound designer is Riley Swedelius-Smith, and our voice actor is Will Rogers. Thanks, as always, for listening, and may none of the daddies we know swipe our last clean sheet to join the Ku Klux.